I tracked every habit for 3 years straight, only to discover I was still the same person. My productivity increased 40%, my fitness improved, but something fundamental was missing. And that's when I realized what 1% better actually means. It's not about adding more to your life. It's about strategically removing what's holding you back. Today, I'm sharing the exact system that finally broke my identity homeostasis after 7 years of trying the wrong approach. You've heard the phrase 1% better every day thrown around like it's some magic formula, but what does it actually mean in mathematical terms? Most people visualize improvement as a straight line going up. You improve 1% today, another 1% tomorrow, and after a year, you're 365% better. That intuitive math is completely wrong. This misunderstanding explains why so many transformation attempts collapse. When you improve by 1% daily, you're not adding 1% each time. You're multiplying your current state by 1.01. After 365 days, you're not 365% better. You're 1.01 raised to the power of 365 better, which equals 37.8 times your starting point. That's not 37% improvement. That's 3,700% improvement. This isn't motivational hyperbole, it's mathematical fact. I discovered this distinction after years of tracking my own improvement attempts. I was making progress, but it was linear, not exponential. My habits were improving, but my identity remained fixed. The numbers showed activity, but not transformation. I couldn't understand why until I started researching how the brain processes change. Your brain operates through neural pathways, physical connections between neurons that strengthen with repetition. This architecture reveals why most improvement attempts fail. Your brain isn't designed for massive overhauls. It's built for incremental rewiring. When you attempt large-scale change, you're fighting against your brain's fundamental structure. Neuroscience shows us that your brain actively resists identity change through a process called homeostasis. The same mechanism that maintains your body temperature at 98.6 degrees maintains your self-concept. If your temperature rises, systems activate to cool you down. Similarly, if your actions contradict your identity, mental resistance emerges to restore equilibrium. This is why willpower-based approaches consistently fail. You're not just fighting habits. You're fighting your brain's core programming to maintain stability. The harder you push, the stronger the resistance becomes. I experienced this myself during 7 years of habit tracking. I could force change temporarily, but my baseline identity always reasserted itself, bringing my behavior back in line with who I believed I was. The critical insight came when I realized transformation happens at a specific threshold, where small actions become frequent enough to trigger identity recalibration. Your brain has a fascinating property. It largely ignores changes it perceives as insignificant. Small actions fly under your identity's defensive radar. They don't trigger the homeostatic resistance that larger changes do. This explains the true power of 1% improvement. It's not about the magnitude of individual actions, but about their ability to bypass your identity's defense mechanisms through their perceived insignificance. Each micro improvement creates a tiny gap between your actions and your self-concept. These gaps accumulate until your brain has no choice but to update your identity to match your new patterns. I tested this approach by designing improvements so small they seemed pointless. Instead of planning to read 30 minutes daily, I committed to reading one paragraph. Instead of attempting a complete diet overhaul, I changed how I arranged food on my plate. These changes seemed trivial, yet they created consistent action patterns that eventually forced identity recalibration. The brain treats small changes as simple variations rather than identity threats. When you put on a jacket, your homeostatic mechanisms don't panic. They adjust because the change falls within acceptable parameters. Similarly, tiny improvements don't trigger identity defense mechanisms, allowing them to accumulate without resistance. Your brain's resistance to change isn't a design flaw, it's a feature protecting your mental stability. Quick identity shifts would create psychological chaos. This protection becomes problematic only when your current identity limits your potential. The 1% approach works precisely because it respects this protection mechanism while gradually expanding its boundaries. This strategy isn't about adding more productivity techniques to your arsenal. It's about strategically dismantling the invisible barriers, maintaining your current identity. Each 1% improvement isn't just a new action, it's a targeted removal of a specific identity limitation. When I finally understood this mechanism, my approach changed entirely. Rather than focusing on what new habits to build, I identified the specific neural pathways maintaining my limitations and designed micro improvements to disrupt them. The results were transformative precisely because they never triggered my brain's resistance mechanisms. The math of 1% improvement reveals why most people fail to change despite sincere effort. They're working against their brain's fundamental architecture rather than with it. Real transformation doesn't require more willpower or better techniques. It requires understanding and respecting the neurological mechanisms governing identity change, then designing improvements specifically to bypass them. What if everything you've been told about habit formation has been fundamentally backward? What if addition is actually the enemy of transformation? After meticulously tracking hundreds of habits for years, I discovered a counterintuitive truth that contradicted everything I thought I knew about personal development. The most powerful changes came not from what I added, but from what I strategically removed. This directly contradicts nearly every productivity system available today. Almost all focus on adding new habits, routines, techniques, and practices to your already overloaded life. The standard approach is fundamentally flawed. Addition creates resistance while subtraction creates space. Each new habit you attempt to incorporate requires cognitive resources that are already allocated elsewhere in your life. The psychological research on this is unambiguous. Our mental bandwidth is finite. This isn't motivational speculation. It's a neurological reality. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and willpower, has strict limitations. Each additional habit you attempt to implement creates direct competition for these limited cognitive resources. If the more new behaviors you try to add simultaneously, the more likely all of them will fail. When I analyzed 3 years of my personal habit tracking data, I found something surprising. The micro habits that created the most significant and lasting change weren't the ones that added new behaviors. They were the ones that removed decision points rather than adding new actions. This pattern repeated across every category: fitness, productivity, creativity, and relationships. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works. For years, I struggled to maintain a consistent morning workout routine. I tried every possible additions: alarm clocks across the room, accountability partners, financial penalties, and pre-workout supplements. None created lasting change. The breakthrough came when I stopped adding and started subtracting. Rather than implementing a complex morning routine, I removed the first decision of the day entirely by placing my workout clothes beside my bed and sleeping in my workout socks. This seemingly trivial change eliminated the first decision point: what to wear, which served as a gateway to all subsequent morning decisions. By removing this single friction point, I bypassed the entire decision cascade that previously derailed my mornings. My workout consistency jumped from 37% to 94% overnight, not by adding motivation, but by removing the need for it. This subtraction approach works because it targets what psychologists call activation energy, the initial resistance that prevents behavior change. Every behavior has an activation threshold that must be overcome before the behavior can begin. Most habit systems try to increase your motivation to overcome this threshold. The subtraction method works by systematically lowering the threshold itself. The real barrier to transformation isn't knowledge or motivation. It's the invisible friction points embedded in your current environment that maintain your existing patterns. These friction points aren't obvious. They're built into the structure of your physical space, your digital environment, and your social connections. They create the path of least resistance that keeps you locked in your current identity. When I compared successful versus failed habit attempts in my data, I found successful changes shared one common element. They systematically eliminated friction points that maintained my previous patterns. Failed attempts focused on overcoming these friction points through willpower alone. The implications changed my entire approach to improvement. The most effective 1% improvements are those that systematically eliminate the friction points maintaining your current identity, creating a vacuum that pulls you toward change rather than pushing you toward it. This vacuum effect is psychologically different from forced change. It feels like you're being drawn toward your new identity rather than struggling to escape your old one. This isn't just theory. It's precisely how I broke through after 7 years of tracking habits without fundamental change. I stopped adding and started subtracting. I mapped every decision point in my day and systematically eliminated those that maintained my limitations. Rather than adding meditation to my morning, I removed my phone from my bedroom. Instead of adding a new diet plan, removed all eating opportunities before noon. Instead of adding new productivity techniques, I removed all notification systems from my devices. Each subtraction created space where my desired identity could emerge naturally. I wasn't forcing new behaviors. I was removing the structures that maintained old ones. But like removing a dam from a river, I wasn't pushing the water forward. I was removing what held it back. The strategic subtraction method reveals why most transformation attempts fail. They focus on addition when the real leverage point is removal. They focus on behavior when the real leverage point is environment. They focus on motivation when the real leverage point is friction. They try to build a new identity atop the foundations of the old one, rather than systematically removing the foundations of the old identity to create space for something new. Being 1% better isn't about becoming a more productive version of your current self. It's about becoming an entirely different person through strategic identity dissolution. Mathematics and neuroscience reveal that transformation happens when you bypass your brain's resistance mechanisms through carefully designed micro-removals. The path forward isn't more information or more effort. It's identifying and removing the specific friction points maintaining your current limitations. Your environment silently dictates your behavior far more than your intentions ever will. Start today by identifying one decision point you can eliminate completely. Remove it entirely from your environment, creating space for your new identity to emerge naturally rather than forcing it into existence.